All right, hey guys, welcome to the video. If you're new here, my name's Curtis, and today I'm going to be tackling a fairly highly requested video topic by some subscribers, and they've basically wanted to know about my journey to Japan and my experiences in Japan and how I got here. And so I was thinking, okay, how can I tell you a little bit more about my personal life and my journey here to Japan, as well as giving you some fragrance content so that way I don't bore you guys to death. So what I've chosen to do is I'll tell you a bit about my journey and experiences here in Japan. And in terms of fragrance content, I'll give you my weekly rotation. So the fragrances that I wore from Monday through Friday, basically, these are the fragrances that I wore to work. So if you're curious to hear a little bit about my life and my journey to Japan, as well as the fragrances that I wore this week, then let's go. All right, but so before I jump into the content about Japan, I will start off with the fragrance that I wore on Monday. And on Monday, by the house of Maison, we have Sketch. Man, so this is just a gorgeous patchouli and vanilla combination. This fragrance wears quite ambery on my skin, and off my skin, I definitely pick up a little bit more on the tuberose than I do the rose. There is a floral aspect to this, but it is, like I said, it's a gorgeous wear, and there is a slight powderiness to this fragrance. So, but it's not overly powdery, and I think, as you guys know, for anybody who's been watching my channel for any amount of time, you know I'm not the biggest fan of powdery fragrances, but this isn't overly powdery or anything like that, but there is a subtle aspect of that in this fragrance. But, you know, to kind of put your mind maybe in a slight direction or push down a similar road, not too similar, but kind of pushes you into a certain vein of fragrance, I guess would be, if you think of something like Grand Soir, it kind of veers off in that direction slightly, but these fragrances are completely different. But this fragrance right here was perfumed by Nathalie Lorsan. She's actually perfumed, I think, all the fragrances for the House of Maison, done a phenomenal job here. Yeah, so Sketch, and then also Un Air d'Apogée, a gorgeous honey tobacco fragrance that you should definitely check out. But yeah, this house is definitely underrated. You don't hear a whole lot of people talking about them. They have such just high quality, you know, pretty natural smelling, and just very well done fragrances. And they're a house that I definitely want to dive into a bit more. I have smelled the majority of the fragrances from that house, but you know, there are some that I haven't smelled. But if you're familiar with the house, you know that they actually just did a rebrand, so you can't get this bottle style anymore. So they've relaunched with a new bottle style, but I really like this one. I feel like this one's just quite elegant and classy looking, and I really enjoy it. So I'm happy that I was able to get Sketch in this bottle design. But yeah, they're definitely an underrated house, and this is a gorgeous fragrance and definitely one to check out. So if you can, get yourself a sample of Sketch by Maison Violet. All right, so jumping into the content about Japan and how, you know, I ended up here in Japan. So let me first start off by saying, so my first experience coming to Japan was when I was about, I think, 20 years old. I was actually in the US military at the time. So I did a deployment to Okinawa, Japan. So, you know, my experience there was like, actually, I really didn't have that great of an impression about Japan. And to be honest, I really didn't venture off the base all that much. So I couldn't really experience Okinawa the way I probably wish I would have. So I didn't really have that great of a taste in my mouth about Japan. I thought, oh wow, this is Japan. Okinawa and mainland Japan, it's probably the same. Well, that couldn't have been further from the truth. Anyways, that deployment in Okinawa ended. I ended up going back to the States, redeployed again to Japan, this time to mainland Japan in Sasebo. It's kind of like the most southern, Japan is comprised of 4 islands. It's the most southern island on Kyushu, and Sasebo is the southern part of that island. And I was there for about 7 months, and it's there where I really realized a few things about Japanese people, the culture, and how things kind of function there, that I was just really kind of taken back by and just very, very impressed. One thing that I realized at the time was Japanese take so much pride in everything that they do. Whether it's somebody working at McDonald's and they're putting fries in the bag, or someone's cleaning up the bathroom and they're mopping the floor. Everything is done with so much pride and perfection, and the consistency with that, the passion behind the work that they're doing, is something that I wasn't really so used to from living in the States. I mean, you do have people who work passionately, but when you look at people who, not all people, but sometimes with people that might work at a job that may not be viewed by society as like such an important job, you may not see them working, or you might get the impression that they don't work as passionately. But in Japan, no matter the job, they do it 100%. They show up and it is done to perfection. And that's something that I realized and really, really respected. And that's something that I tried to apply to my life at the time. It was just inspiring to see. And no matter what I was doing, always give it 100%, give my best effort, and be passionate about what I'm doing. Be in that moment, be passionate about it. And that was something that I really learned and respected about the Japanese culture and how people and society just kind of functioned. I think the level of respect that they have for their surroundings and the people around them is something else that I really, really noticed. And yeah, that was kind of my first kind of taste of Japan, and kind of something that really, it just made such a big impression on me. And I remember going back to the States and really missing Japan and thinking like, man, I've got to get back there. I want to know more. I want to learn more. I want to dive into the language a little bit. And so at that point, I really kind of made a decision, one day I'm going to get back there. All right, so we'll jump into the fragrance that I wore on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, from the house of Nishane, we have B612. Man, so hands down, this is definitely one of my favorites from the house of Nishane. This is just a very modern take on a fougere. You get those typical fougere notes like lavender, oak moss. You have some woods in the base, but you also have some cashmere in here, which is kind of helping to kind of tie everything together. But it's just very clean. You have that soapy-like quality. And it's very, I think, classic masculine, but not dated. But I do also think that even though I say masculine, this fragrance is unisex, but it definitely pushes to the masculine side in my opinion. But women who are watching this channel, don't be afraid. You can definitely wear this and pull this one off. Wear what you like. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. Like the unisex, masculine, feminine, none of that matters. Just wear what you love, wear what you like. But yeah, this is definitely one of my favorites from the house. I mean, you can see I've put quite the dent in this one. It's definitely one of my favorite fougères, and it's just, like I said, it's just quite a unique take on a modern style of fougère. Gorgeous wear. If you want to feel sophisticated, gentlemanly, clean, fresh, go with a fragrance like this. So if you can, get yourself a sample of B612 by Nishane. All right, so picking up where I left off. So basically years had passed. I'd gotten out of the military and I decided, oh, hey, I really want to dive into the Japanese language and learn a bit more about that as well as the culture. So I decided to become a Japanese major. When I went to university, declared Japanese as my major. And so, that was good. It gave me, I learned, not only did I learn about language, but I learned about like some historical facts about Japan, a bit of literature. But it, like I said, it kind of helped to really give me a solid base with Japanese language. And, the writing system is quite complicated. You do have three types of writing. So you have hiragana, katakana, and kanji. So most of you are probably familiar with kanji. And I remember thinking when I started learning that, I would look at the kanji characters. I'm like, how do you get a word out of that? So that was just a fun and very difficult learning experience because, I remember just sitting when I would study and I would just write these characters over and over and over. One character, I would write it 100 times in order to try and remember it. So I remember I studied extremely hard at university. I'm not one of those people who can just kind of pick up language really easily. Like I had to work very, very hard at it in order to get to a decent kind of level. But yeah, so I studied university, and then I was like, hey, you know what? Let me kind of put this degree to use. Let me try to get a job in Japan. So in 2012, I found a job, moved over here to Japan, and I quickly realized that the Japanese that I learned in university did pretty much nothing for me here. There's a big difference between textbook Japanese and street Japanese. And I found myself, I remember thinking, oh no. Like, I can't really communicate with anybody here. So it was kind of like a relearning process for me. And, granted, I had a base and I knew like the structure and how the language functioned, but, I wasn't speaking it kind of in everyday life, like how Japanese speak Japanese. So there was kind of a relearning process there for me. And also the area of Japan that I went to originally, they spoke a different dialect. So it was difficult for me to kind of understand some of the things that they were saying. So, while my base in Japanese really kind of helped me to hit the ground running to a certain extent, I really had to relearn a bunch of things and learn new things about the language, like the dialect. So that was interesting but challenging at the time. But overall, it was a great experience for me. And I think where I was at the time, I was in an area where there were no foreigners. Up in the mountains, middle of the mountains, no foreigners. I was the foreigner. And, when you are the only foreigner, not only do you stick out like a sore thumb, but you're almost treated like a celebrity in the sense. I remember, people just wanting to come up and talk to me, like they're curious, right? What are you doing here? Like they wanted to come up, talk to me, have a chat. I remember, it was very easy for me to talk to people, and the Japanese people were very, very nice. And then, I had experience, like I remember walking through a supermarket and there was this little girl and she was holding her mom's hand and she was like, oh, Mega, how, like saying like, he has blue eyes. And I remember hearing that, I'm like, oh my, like, wow. Just like the shock of seeing somebody that looks different, not like what they're used to seeing, and like, wow, he has blue eyes. But I remember just thinking like, wow, this is just so interesting. But yeah, I spent about 2 years in that area, and then I moved to Chiba, Japan, which if you're familiar with the geography of Japan, Chiba is west of Tokyo. So, and I've been here ever since. All right, so the fragrance I wore on Wednesday is from the house of Dorsay. We have Flower, Lust, deep, warm, sweet, peppery, spicy, with florals just kind of bouncing around and floating around your head. And that's basically what you get here. This is such a gorgeous floral fragrance created by Dominique Ropion. He is a master perfumer who just works magic with floral fragrances. You may know some of his past work, like Portrait of a Lady by Frederic Malle. That is a masterpiece fragrance. But yeah, this is a floral fragrance that's a bit spicy with some ambery tones and a bit of woods in the base. A very, very gorgeous wear. And I think the first thing, I remember when I smelled this fragrance for the first time, the first thing I thought about was Nishane Poppy Lafico. Now, these fragrances aren't the same, but there are definite similarities there. And it was interesting because Dominique Ropion also created Poppy Lafico by Nishane. But, you know, again, like I said, those fragrances are not the same, but there was just subtle hints that kind of reminded me of the fragrance. In this fragrance too, it does have quite a heavy floral presence, and that the florals here come off quite sharp, and it might almost kind of take you back a little bit, but for me, it's part of the experience and I really, really enjoy it. But yeah, this fragrance performs quite well. This is an extrait de parfum, and if you're not familiar with House of Dorsay, they're a French house, and they're mainly known for creating fragrances that are more so like, you know, moderate performance, very elegant, almost kind of skin scents. But they released 3 extraits recently, Flower Lust being one of them, and these fragrances perform extremely well, and they really just kind of knocked it out of the park with the 3 extraits that they created. They have Flower Lust, Tonka Hysteria, and Incense Crush. I've smelled all of them. I also own Incense Crush, and yeah, they are all just amazing. And yeah, definitely a house to check out, but more specifically, the extraits, hands down, just phenomenal fragrances. So yeah, you should definitely check them out. So if you can, get yourself a sample of Flower Lust by Dorsay. All right, so yeah, so I've been in Japan now, you know, for 13 years. So I've been here for quite a long time. And there are, I feel like if I'm looking at my time here, I feel like there were 4 phases that I went through. And those, I'll tell you what those four phases are, and then I'll kind of break those down and go through them. But the first phase is kind of like when you move to Japan, it's that excitement phase. You're like,
oh my gosh, big lights, anime, Tokyo, you know, Shibuya, like, oh.
Like you're just so excited. Like everything just looks so different than what you're used to seeing. Like for me, being from the States, just things are just, you know, bright, flashing, big robots, you know, like, you know, you just kind of going through that kind of excitement phase. Phase number 2 is a phase that I like to call kind of the choshi no teru. So choshi no teru means kind of like when you're kind of almost full of yourself or a bit conceited in the sense. You know, you're thinking that you're kind of like, yeah, I'm the man, you know, and I'll break down as to why that is a bit later. Phase 3 is kind of like the resentment phase. And I'll go into detail as to why you kind of go through that phase. And then phase 4 is the phase of acceptance. This is the way things are. You know, I've accepted the culture, and, you know, I'm taking the good with the bad. This is just how Japan is. So yeah, kind of like I said, you know, you go through those 4 phases. Phase 1, you know, just you're in a different environment. Everything is so different. You know, you're not used to the language. You know, there aren't very many foreigners here. At least when I came, there weren't a whole lot of foreigners, at least where I was. And so it was just kind of like, oh, hey, wow, this is amazing. You know, kind of like the big lights, like the, you know, the buildings, just kind of the way the shops are set up, like everything just looks so cool and new. So yeah, that was an interesting time. And I think, like, you know, that phase, the excitement phase, probably lasted about, you know, probably close to a year for me. You know, I would say 6 months to a year. And then after that, I went into the choshi no teru phase, which is kind of like, I'm the best. And I'll tell you why. So Japanese, so whenever you speak to Japanese, like they'll pay a lot of compliments to you, and compliments that aren't necessarily deserved. So like, for example, when I first came to Japan, I could not speak Japanese very well. And I still don't speak fluently, but I mean, my Japanese is functional now. But they'll say, even if I just say, oh, konnichiwa, like just one word, they'll be like, oh, nihongo jozu desu ne, meaning like, wow, your Japanese is so good. And they're telling you that to make you feel comfortable, and it's more of like an appreciation of like, oh, thank you for speaking Japanese, thank you for trying, because they know the language is difficult for foreigners to learn. So you kind of have to look behind what they're saying. It's more so they're saying that to make you feel comfortable, and also kind of from an appreciation aspect of you trying to speak the language. They're not necessarily saying that, wow, you're an amazing Japanese speaker, so you shouldn't take it literally. But when you hear things like, oh, nihongo jozu desu ne, like your Japanese is so good, or ohashi o jozu desu ne, like you use chopsticks so well, or like, oh, ikemen, like you're so handsome. When you hear those types of comments constantly, you almost kind of start to believe it. If you don't quite know how the culture kind of functions and works and why they're saying those things, then you're like, yeah, I can use chopsticks really well, grabbing flies out of the air, or yeah, my Japanese is pretty good, must be really good, or yeah, man, everybody's telling me I'm handsome, I must be the man. You start to get a bit full of yourself and kind of like, I'm like, is this really happening right now? Am I really the man? And so you kind of start to believe that over time. Yeah, so, I would say I definitely went through that phase, like for a very short period. And once I kind of figured things out and, figured out why Japanese people are saying that, I quickly moved off of that phase. And I went on to phase 3, which in phase 3 is kind of the resentment phase. And so, the resentment phase, what I mean is like, of course, like I'm trying to learn the language. I want to speak Japanese and I want to speak to Japanese people. So what you'll find though a lot of times is when you speak in Japanese, let's say you're with a friend, maybe your friend is Japanese. And so if I go to a restaurant and I'm asking the waiter or waitress a question and I'm speaking Japanese, I'll ask them, they'll turn, look at my friend and answer. They'll tell the answer to my friend instead of telling the answer to me. I'll ask a question, they'll answer that question to my friend. And I'm like, wait, no, look at me. I just asked you in Japanese. Tell me the answer, don't tell my friend, or I'll speak in Japanese and then they'll reply in very, very broken English, almost uncomprehendable English. I'm like, no, just speak Japanese to me. Just tell me back in Japanese, like it's okay, but yeah, there's that kind of almost social awkwardness. And that's something that I really struggled with for a long time. Or like, if I was riding the train and sitting on the train, the train would be completely full, but no one would sit next to me, on either side. So there was kind of like a separation or a wall there for some reason. And it's not that like, Japanese are trying to discriminate or there's nothing like that. It's just Japanese people can be very shy and, they want to try to avoid possible uncomfortable situations, and that's all that is. Maybe they don't want to sit there because they're like, oh, this foreigner can't speak English, and if he starts to speak English to me, what am I going to do? I can't speak English. It's because of things like that. So I think, once you start to kind of accept and understand that, then you can it kind of helps to get through that phase of the journey. And then after that phase 3, you move into phase 4, which is the acceptance phase. And you understand that, hey, this is the way Japanese society is. I've accepted it. I'm at peace with it. and I can live and function in this society and really appreciate my time here in Japan. But it's really funny because, I have friends that have been here for 20 years, and they're still stuck in phase 2 of like, I'm the man, I use chopsticks so well, my Japanese is amazing, but they don't really speak very much, but they're still stuck in phase 2. But it's just kind of fun, we all are on our own kind of path, our own journey, and it's no criticism or harp towards those people that are stuck in phase 2. I have friends that are stuck in phase 3, they are just unhappy, resenting Japan. It's just like, okay, well, if you're stuck in phase 3 and you're unhappy about it, just go back to your country, leave. Nobody's forcing you to stay here in Japan. But I've been there too. I was in phase 3, but I'm in phase 4 now, comfortably. I know the way the culture works. I understand it. I respect it, and I accept it. That's why I live here. I love living here in Japan. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people, and just, I couldn't picture my life any other way. All right, so moving on to the fragrance I wore on Thursday. On Thursday, from the house of Jeroboam, we have Ambra. All right, so this is just a very gorgeous ambery, kind of vanillic, balsamic fragrance. It is quite balsamic, and you can definitely tell that from the first blast. You do have a bit of spice in here, a bit of geranium, as well as some incense, which is giving it just a very slight smoky quality. But man, this is such a gorgeous wear, and it's quite unique in terms of amber fragrances in my own collection. But yeah, I love the House of Jeroboam, and I think I have 6 or 7 fragrances from the house, but they're a great house, and they're actually the sister company of Javoy. They kind of sit in the shadows of Javoy. But yeah, they produce 30 ml extrait de parfum concentrations, and I love the bottle size, especially for me kind of living here in Japan. I don't have a lot of space, and anytime I can buy the smaller bottle size, I will. Just because the amount of fragrances in my collection, I'm not such a big sprayer either in terms of how many sprays I typically do. So for me to go through like a 30 ml of this, I may not ever go through a 30 ml of this. I wear a different fragrance each day. Or it would take me a very long time. So, anytime I can go with a smaller bottle, I typically do. But yeah, I love Jeroboam as a house. They have quite unique and just gorgeous smelling fragrances, and Ambra is no exception. Yeah, this is a very underrated amber fragrance in my opinion, and it's definitely one to check out. So if you can, get yourself a sample of Ambra by Jeroboam. Yeah, so kind of talking about like where I am now in terms of like my Japanese ability. Like I said, I speak Japanese decently. Like I don't have any problems from a conversational standpoint. I can go to a bar, strike up a conversation with anyone, talk about, various topics. I would say the only time I really run into a problem with Japanese nowadays is like if I go to like a doctor's office and I'm hearing kind of like technical, like medical terminology that, even in English, like there's medical terminology. I don't have no idea what they're talking about. So of course, like in Japanese, I kind of run into that same kind of problem. But other than that, yeah, I don't really have any problem with Japanese, and I use Japanese in my daily life to communicate. So yeah, it's been quite an amazing journey here, and like I said, I've been here for 13 years, and I just don't see myself. I'm settled in. I consider Japan home. I don't see myself living in the States in the future. It might happen at some point, but I see myself kind of, just staying here. I just love the culture, the way things are, the way society functions. And yeah, I'm quite happy with my life here, so I can't complain. Yeah, Japan just has so much to offer, and if you've never been to Japan before, I highly recommend coming. There's so many things about this culture that I'm so thankful for, and I hope that everybody can experience if you have an interest to visit. So moving on to my final fragrance from the house of 8 & Bob, we have Egypt. Man, so this one is just masculine elegance in a bottle. This is more along the lines of like an amber fougere style fragrance. It smells absolutely amazing. And for me personally, when I wear this one's a compliment getter. You know, compliments, you know, they are what they are, but you know, it is always nice to get compliments. So people really, really enjoy this one on me for whatever reason. But yeah, it does smell amazing. It really does. And I think from the house of 8 & Bob, Egypt is by far my favorite one. Now, what's interesting though is like Egypt, I'm not sure why they called this fragrance Egypt. I don't know if it has a specific relation to Egypt in terms of, you know, whoever was thinking about the concept for this fragrance, but I personally can't find the relation between this fragrance and Egypt. It definitely does not smell Middle Eastern. It just smells like very classic fougere style of fragrance with some ambery notes. You know, you have that lavender and oak moss in here as well. But yeah, it just smells intoxicatingly good. And the sillage that this one leaves is gorgeous. And I remember when one compliment that I got when I was wearing this one was I was in Tokyo and I was going up the escalator. And I remember there was a couple behind me and I exited off and the girl was like, "Oh my gosh, someone smells amazing. What's that smell?" And I was thinking, yeah, it's me. And I had just sprayed this one on, so maybe that's why the sillage was really kicking off. But yeah, this is a gorgeous wear and definitely one to check out from the house. So if you can, get yourself a sample of Egypt by 8 & Bob. Alright guys, that's all I have for you for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed today's content. And yeah, let me know down in the comments section, have you tried any of the fragrances that I wore this past week? What are your thoughts and opinions on them? And do you have any thoughts and opinions about Japan? Have you ever been to Japan? Do you have any other questions that maybe I didn't answer in the video? Yeah, just let me know down in the comment section below. Well, I hope you guys are staying healthy and well, and I'll see you in the next video.